Hello, I'm Graham Smith.
And I'm Abby Tartellen.
And this is From Below the Balcony, the Republic podcast.
We are so pleased to be with you. This is our second season as that rare space in British media where celebrities, politicians, comedians and journalists can talk freely about our shared republicanism and criticise the inegalitarianism that puts billionaires and inherited power at the heart of our country. Last season, we explored how the British monarchy is inextricably linked to colonialism, empire and slavery. This season, on YouTube and podcast channels everywhere, we discuss how taxing the 1%, environmentalism, gender and billionaires are indelibly Republican issues. Our previous guest, comedian Christian Brighty and producer Jeff Atkinson, have both asked me to send their well wishes to our guest today. He's a writer, activist and environmentalist whose work is so beloved by many in the UK, and whose books include seminal works Feral, Regenesis and The Invisible Doctrine. We'll be talking monarchy and the environment, land reform, taxing wealth, and changing the constitution. But first, let's get some right royal news from my co-host, Republic Campaign's CEO, Graham. So, Graham, we've just had Trooping the Colour.
Yeah, so this is the third time that we've protested Trooping the Colour. So this is the big parade down the Mall from they all troop out in their carriages and on their horses with a bunch of soldiers in their lovely red jackets.
Of course, because if you're not super into the monarchy, you might not know what Trooping the Colour was.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people don't really. I mean,
yeah.
I
think I only vaguely knew
on
when
the
I started
details
here.
Until more recently, until I started turning up. But it is that big sort of procession that it's probably one of the things they're well known for, because they go down to Horse Guards Parade at the other end of the Mall, watch the soldiers march up and down the square, and then come back down again, and then they come out on the balcony, and there's a flyover of various RAF planes.
And how meaningful is that to British identity? What do you think the meaning is?
Well, not really. I mean, I would guess, because there used to be a big royal, I keep forgetting what it's called now, royal something or other, in Royal Albert Hall until 1998, I think it was, and it got cancelled, and no one can remember what it was now.
Do you mean like a royal night or
a big military thing? And
a military thing.
Yeah, and royal tattoo or something. I forget now, but it's it's patronised by the royals, and
because they have a royal music night, don't they? Because I'm pretty sure Jerry Halliwell sang at it.
Possibly,
yeah. During the era of the Spice Girls, which is my era.
Yeah,
I know about
smaller scale stuff, but yeah. Anyway, the crowds there are definitely smaller than they used to be. If you look, they always do this shot from fairly low when it's just looking down the Mall across people's heads, so you can't really see the huge spaces between people, and it looks like a lot of people. Like it looks like the Mall's full, and it's not remotely full. And when you look at the aerial shot when the royals coming out on the balconies, it might be a couple of thousand people there, but most of them are probably tourists. There are people there. There were people there who were in the audience for the actual trooping bit, who have walked down the Mall, so they're
they might
quite
be
keen.
Friends and family, or
I don't know who they are. I guess there's a lot of the the great and good, as it were, and sort of lords, lieutenants, and people like that, and then they pack it out with cadets and scouts and so on.
And you're there,
and we're there. We've been there for the last 3 years, and so we there's a running argument with the police about whether or not where we can be and what we can do and all the rest of it. But they have allowed us to go down to the palace when the royals come out. And what's interesting is that the crowd, because most of them are not particularly royalist, most of them are tourists, to be honest. When the flyover starts, the crowd goes dead quiet because they're all on their phones taking photos of the royals on the balcony and filming the planes coming over.
Yeah.
So when we start with the megaphone and chanting "Not My King" and sort of heckling Charles, they can hear us.
It's really polite of the crowd.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very nice of them. Yeah.
That's so interesting what you said about that the camera is at a low angle in order to make it look like there are more people there. And it got me thinking, like, well, why would it be important for whoever's filming to do that? But then presumably somebody gets a contract to go and film that.
Well, it's BBC Events does the contract. So BBC
do you
Events
think that they're in danger of losing it if they don't do that, or if they show a bunch of
100%.
Blank space? Or
I mean, the BBC Events are appalling. I mean, we have written to them before about their North Korea-esque coverage, because with they always, you can see the panning of the camera as they go down the Mall, that they pan lower to dodge any sign of the protests. And they say nothing. I mean, in the coverage, I don't know who it was. Last year it was Claire Balding and Giles Brandreth doing narration. And it's all sycophantic nonsense about how lovely they are and how hard they work and
Do you
how
think
there's
that
huge
actually-
crowds. But they didn't. You could hear us in the background
Yeah.
very clearly, as you could this year, and they make almost no mention of us.
That's so interesting. Do you think that they think that it makes more interesting television for everybody to agree that the royals are so great than it does to film a protest?
It's
Because
not
I
about
feel like the
interesting TV.
story is
It's
like there's a protest going on, there's the
Well,
royals
yeah.
going
well,
on.
indeed, you would think there'd
Fractured
be
Britain.
Yeah, you would think so. Because some of the, I mean, what's funny is that a lot of these royalists, if we're there, they boo us, and so, but on the footage, it sounds like they're booing the royals. So
Yeah.
you know,
Helpful once
quite,
again.
yeah, exactly. They're
Great
very
crowd.
very good to us in that
Yeah.
sense. But they have a contract with the royals, and it's very clear that the royals say this is what we want. You know, and if you don't include people like the Republicans, but I was allowed into the media tent to do an interview on Sky, and I found out later from someone in the tent that there was words said from the MOD about why I was let in there.
Wow.
Yeah, you know, why is the MOD trying to tell the media who they can and can't let into the media?
Yeah,
tent?
and also why, like what would be the threat? Why is the MOD somehow protecting the royal family over? You're a member of the British public,
Yeah,
right?
I know,
So
it's absolutely
you're
appalling.
also
So we're going
in
to be
need
looking
of
into that.
protection.
And same with the police. They put a condition on us that we had to be in a particular space. Now, in order to use a condition under the Section 14 thing, you have to say that the reason why, and they had to tick a box saying we believe there's a risk of serious public damage to property and serious disruption,
Which
which
you've never
clearly
done.
is a lie.
You've never done, right?
No. So
And can I just for the newbies in the crowd, Section 14, explain?
Well, it's just one of the many, many laws we have in this country curtailing the right to protest. So, and it's been abused before. It's not the worst abuse of it, but it's an outright lie. So we will be taking that up with the police. I mean, it didn't really disrupt our protest. We were able to protest, and I'd encourage everybody to come down because it's actually a lot of fun.
But it does. It's quite scary that they're like telling this narrative about you that you disrupt things and might damage property because, down the line,
That's the problem.
you could see a narrative like that leading to prosecutions that have there's no real reality behind them, but there's a narrative,
which I'm sure happens already. But I mean, I think we're not by any stretch the most put upon protesters, but likewise and I've said this to the police, we should be your poster boys for protest because we're always peaceful and law abiding.
Yeah.
It's just not it's not within our strategy to
and
try and disrupt things.
You bring a T-Rex. You dress nicely.
Yeah. Well,
You're always shouting catchy slogans. I wanted to ask you, because we've said in the previous 2 episodes that we're going to talk a bit more about Republic campaign strategy for 2026.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you're changing this year in terms of how you work towards creating a Republic?
Well, I think broadly speaking, the strategy is still the same. The focus is on 2 sort of stages, 3 stages, but the first 2 are sort of building and persuading. So it's kind of going to that now 33% or thereabouts who already agree with us and saying, look, there's reasons to take this seriously, to get behind it, to put your money where your mouth is, to join, so on. So that's the building thing, to build our capacity to do more campaigning.
And is that the 33% figure, is that people who are Republicans and agree, or is that people who just...
No, there's people who say at the moment in polling that that they would prefer to have a republic.
Right, okay.
So, yeah, that's reasonably
It's a good start,
consistent.
isn't it? You
It's
could
gone
get
up a lot over the
a
last few years.
political party elected under first past the post with that kind of
Yeah,
numbers,
indeed. I mean,
those kind of numbers.
In fact, I think there's more people wanting a republic than there are supporting any of the current political parties because they're all, under 30% the last time I looked. So, and that's a big change from 10 years ago.
Well, you should think about running.
But then there's the persuade, which is to get the next sort of 17% on side, so we hit the 50% mark, and that's part of what this is about, is to reach those new audiences of people that are on the fence or sort of think, well, I sort of don't agree with it, but I don't care, or think, yes, it's silly, but it's not important.
That's something that we talked a lot about during meetings running up to this season, isn't it? That I do think millennials like myself and Gen Z people are now like Gen A are all becoming adults, all able to vote. And there's a lot of us who will agree with narratives like that we should tax wealth. And that, who we're anti-climate change, pro-environmentalism, feminists. But the monarchy is just not something necessarily that people it's not an issue that people like adopt as their own. It's not particularly hip, and they're kind of in the background in a way, aren't they?
Yeah.
And they've done that on purpose,
I mean,
haven't they? That's part of their PR.
Yeah, absolutely.
Machine.
It's changing. That is changing. But I think, which is hence the changing in mood and so on. But I think that, and part of that is to do with the changing monarch and to do with Andrew and scandals and so on, and also to do with us as well, and that we've changed the image, if you like, of republicanism. But yeah, we've got a long way to go because it's not quite the zeitgeist movement. But and a part of it is to attach it to those things which are much more serious. But also the monarchy issue is becoming more urgent because it does address a whole load of issues around power and politics.
I think when I saw a post by Everyone Hates Elon about the monarchy, that's when I thought, oh, great, like it's in the public consciousness and it's going to become something that people just adopt as part of this slew of issues and values that they hold.
And it is, because, there's a great deal of concern about this unchecked power of the wealthy. And the wealthy are getting so wealthy that their power is getting out of hand. And, of course, there is the rise of authoritarianism and populism and the right in a country that has almost no checks and balances or guardrails around its constitution.
I've really been amazed, like, while I've been co-hosting here, learning about the duchies and about the abuses of power and about how much money they have and about kind of Jeff Atkinson, one of our guests from the previous season. We did a fantastic live episode with him in front of members. He called me the other day and he was talking about a Channel 4 news item he's putting together. And he was talking about basically one royal getting $1 million here, one royal getting $1 million there to kind of grease the wheels of business deals that were going on, but that affected the country and real estate and local people. It was very interesting talking to him. But I just I'm kind of, have been horrified and particularly last season talking about kind of genocide and slavery and African remains in British museums and things like that. Like the number of atrocities that predecessors of this family, or at least the people who have held this power and passed it on to this particular family, have committed, are so vile, and you just kind of never hear about them. But I wanted to ask you about something a bit more pathetic in a way. Just today, the Daily Express reported that Charles is refusing to set a date to meet up with Harry this summer. There was absolutely tons of stuff about Harry and Meghan in the paper over the last couple of days. Yep. Is it worth it talking about these family spats? Is there polling to suggest issues like this move the needle for members of the public in any significant way?
I think it's difficult to tell. I mean, they've done a serious number on Harry and Meghan for the most absurd reasons. I mean, they haven't actually done anything wrong. But what's particularly obscene is when you see journalists and commentators talk about Harry in the same breath as Andrew. That, if you're going to take Andrew's titles, why not Harry's? It's like, well, because Harry hasn't done anything wrong.
Yeah, that's so gross to conflate the two.
Yeah, absolutely appalling. I mean, Harry is... I'm not a big fan of Harry and Meghan. I'm not a big fan of any of them. But all he's done is speak his mind in public, explain how his experience as being a royal, and decide it's not for him, and walk away.
I think he's come across very human. Yeah. I mean, you're not going to get out of a childhood like that unscathed, and I don't think they pretend to be.
No, indeed. And I think that his actions are entirely reasonable, and the suggestion that somehow, that he is an awful person for doing that is absurd. But there is quite deliberate briefing, and there's stories in the papers are coming from the palace.
Do you think they help their cause?
Well, I think that they hope that they want to make sure they continue to damage it. I mean, the polling suggests that they're not popular anymore in the UK because there's been this briefing against them. But I find it all quite pathetic. I mean, it's in terms of will Charles meet his...
There's just Graham's just knocked something off the table. We're surrounded by papers here, all the research that we've done ahead of meeting our guests.
Yeah, well, I mean, I find it quite pathetic, this idea that, there's speculation about whether Charles is going to meet Harry. I mean, it doesn't matter. There's loads of families who are estranged.
It's such a toxic family dynamic.
Well, it is, but I mean, that's not unusual.
Does it make people dislike having these people as figureheads?
I don't think so, because so many people have difficult family relationships. Yeah. And I think that people, it's not unusual. And I think it's weird that given that he's done nothing particularly wrong, and I don't think it speaks well of Charles and William that they've reacted in that way, because, as I said, he's not needed, he's not the heir, he hasn't done any damage to the monarchy, he has simply embarrassed them and threatened the PR image. But they could have actually leaned into that and said, look, we fully support Harry making his own decisions, and the monarchy is stronger, that we can carry on without him and whatever, and we still, he's still part of our family. But instead they turned on him, which I think is pretty appalling.
It's interesting to me that you say that, part of those stories about Harry in the Daily Express, actually come from the royal household. Do you think that kind of reporting in newspapers neutralizes our perception of their power because they're reporting solely on things you or I could experience, like a weekend in Vegas or not going to Ascot?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of appalling reporting in the press that comes from briefings from the palace, which is quite consciously tailored to create a particular image, which is not only positive, but draws the eye away from other issues. So, you can see particular journalists in serious newspapers who just talk absolute nonsense about the royals, particularly around things. Recently we've had the National Audit Office, which put out a report saying that working royals had, so-called working royals had 11 royals had huge homes in Kensington Palace and St James's Palace. And a lot of the spiel the following days was William is going to be tough on this, William's going to take the reins, and William's going to be proactive in sort of dealing with this. And then there was stuff about Charles, that he's going to rethink the way that royal property is managed and divvied out. Well, it's not their property, so they shouldn't be making these decisions. But it's all being pitched as if William and Charles were in charge. But it's two different, this is the other thing, it's two different camps. So William's camp and Charles's camp are not the same. And they counter-brief against each other in subtle ways by trying to put one of them in front of the other as being the mover and shaker.
Oh, that's just so interesting. It's all just a big episode of Succession.
We just, as you know, we've got this webinar, which is once a month on Tuesday evenings, called Beyond the Royal Headlines. And we had Andrew Loney, who's the author of entitled the book, the biography of Andrew, talking about this in quite a lot of detail, because he talks to a lot of people in the background in these camps that, they don't necessarily get on because there is this tension between what William wants to do and what Charles wants to do. Of course, Charles is already king and he's got a legacy to think about. He's very much towards the end of his life. William is thinking ahead and wants a monarchy basically that suits his interests. He's very lazy. He doesn't feel the need to do all the public duties, so he wants to. But he also doesn't want people to be prying into his business. So I think the monarchy will take a turn for the worse under him, and he's clearly trying to shift it in a direction that's going to suit his interests, expecting his dad not to be around for that much longer.
Graham, we have a new bit that we introduced last episode called Bust a Myth. I still want us to do the head thing where we go like this. Bust a myth, bust a myth. Anyway, I will just say, so you've got 1 minute and 1 minute alone to bust. I'm going to go to my clock, put on my stopwatch. You've got 1 minute to bust this myth. Graham, Buckingham Palace and the royals bring in more money than any other royal family.
Any other royal family? Well, that might be true, I suppose. But I mean, if the myth is about them being good for tourism, I mean, the point is there's no evidence they bring anything for tourism at all. I met in 2011 or 2012, I met the CEO and chair of Visit Britain that promotes us as a tourist destination overseas. And I said to them, there's no evidence that we would lose tourism revenue if the monarchy was gone. And they said, no, you're correct. There is no such evidence. And there simply isn't any. It never has been shown. No figures have been put forward that stand up to any scrutiny. So it is a myth that has been generated by people trying to defend their expenditure.
You have 30 seconds left, and I thought that you were going to talk about maybe the royal palace in the world that generates the most money. Do you want to do that in your last 20 seconds? Do you know which one it is?
Well, I'm assuming you're talking about Versailles.
Yes, I am talking about Versailles.
If you look at the UK, people always make exceptions for France. If you look at the UK, Tower of London is far more popular than Buckingham Palace. Tower of London in the top 10, Buckingham Palace in the top 20.
But I'm talking about palaces because obviously we've got the royal family and you know...
But Tower of London is a palace. But
That's
I want to say that Windsor Castle is something like 22.
Yeah, Buckingham Palace is 20 to 25 million a year in total admission income. Do you want to hazard a guess at what the Palace of Versailles is?
I know.
Exceeds 100 million euros every year.
But Windsor Castle is far less popular than Windsor Legoland. So it's, they do not draw the people in.
We're off to Legoland. In future episodes, Graham and I will be talking about recent non-fiction releases. Andrew Lowney's entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York, Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir, Nobody's Girl, and protests and members' events for the rest of the year. So do subscribe to us wherever you are watching or listening. And remember, this season you can send us questions at podcast@republic.org.uk for our upcoming guests. So Graham, who's our guest today?
George Monbiot is an award-winning journalist, activist, founder of movements and projects challenging the power of governments and the vested interests of the rich. And judging from his early career, a fearless adventurer setting off across Indonesia, the Amazon and East Africa in pursuit of groundbreaking stories about injustices, land rights and environmental destruction. George is also a prolific author with more than a dozen books to his name, from Poisoned Arrows, published in 1989, to Feral in 2013, Regenesis in 2022 on how we feed the world without destroying the environment, and his latest book out in 2024, The Invisible Doctrine, The Secret History of Neoliberalism and How It Came to Control Your Life. And he sees his life as a slightly unhinged adventure whose perpetuation is something of a mystery. So a fascinating life and career that would take more than the time we have to dissect in great detail. But in short, it's fair to say George is not a fan of the rich and powerful, which makes him a perfect guest on From Below the Balcony. George, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Now, I was going to ask, obviously, jump straight into the question of the royals. I mean, are William and Charles great advocates against climate change, or is that much bullshit, bad for the environment?
Well, look, I mean, I've got no particular animus against them as people. I think they've got a ridiculous job, and I wouldn't want to do it myself. There are certain other members of the royal family who I do feel I have very different views about, as you might imagine. But, we can come on to the issue of the institution, which is another matter, of course. So it's quite interesting that there is a strong strand of a particular kind of environmentalism running through the royal family. It was there with Prince Philip, King Charles, and then now with Prince William. And it has slightly evolved over time. But what it focuses on is what I see as one of the three philosophies of environmentalism. And I think in philosophical terms, we're the most diverse movement that I know of that has ever existed on Earth, because it encapsulates these very different worldviews and yet somehow manages more or less to cohere, with a few rows along the way, but surprisingly few by comparison to, for instance, standard left politics, whose main occupation is ripping each other's heads off. And so these three philosophies that I perceive in environmentalism are, first of all, green liberationism, which is very much founded in social justice. It's inspired by decolonization movements, civil rights movements, feminist, anti-apartheid movements, etc. Justice and liberty are absolutely fundamental to its worldview, and it's represented by groups like Fridays for Future, or Green New Deal Rising, Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, etc. Very visible, very much engaged in protest. We're all familiar with that model of environmentalism. So green liberationism is one philosophical strand. And then you've got what I would call green pragmatism, which is very much about, well, we just need to get the right technological change, we need to apply the lessons of science, and we need to do these sensible things which need to be done. And you could see this really in the position of Ed Miliband in the government.
So it's a technical issue, fix that and carry on.
Exactly. Technical issue with a technical solution. And obviously we need technical solutions. My belief is we also need political and economic change, and often in this green pragmatist worldview, the political and economic stuff is shunted to one side in favour of this purely technical approach. And with the current British government, that takes an extreme form in that they're really trying to shut down people's voices and say, you will accept this. You are going to have the solar farms, you're going to have the pylons, you're going to have the nuclear power plants because it's all for the greater good.
And that doesn't feel particularly persuasive, does it?
No.
Because, you're not appealing to anybody's better values or economic situation.
Yeah. I mean, it's really swapping out persuasion for coercion, and I find this quite disturbing in some ways. What's so interesting is how little effort it's made to persuade. Where are the public information videos? Where's the emergency briefing? We've got
There's
a
almost
climate
less of it
emergency
now than there was before.
Yeah, and it's just like, we know what's best. We've got good scientific advice, so you're going to have it. Now, there are more benign forms of green pragmatism, but that is it's sort of exemplified really in the government approach. And then there's a third strand, which is very much certainly King Charles's strand.
Yep.
To an extent, perhaps Prince William's, I'm not so sure. It was definitely the Duke of Edinburgh's strand, Prince Philip's. And this is what I call green social nostalgia. And it's all about things were better in the past. I say social nostalgia because I think all Greens are ecologically nostalgic, because we realise the extent to which ecosystems have been depleted and we like to see them restored. That cuts across all aspects. But the Green social nostalgia is a distinct philosophy from those other two. And it's very much tied up with this idea of rural revivalism, which is we've got to have a localized land-based economy protected by protectionist tariffs. It should be homespun. We basically regret everything that's happened since the Industrial Revolution, including in some cases we regret the democracy that goes with it. It can often be a very elite version of environmentalism, and it's very easily adopted by fascist movements. It was an absolute mainstay of fascist movements in the 1920s and 1930s, and is again today. And it has this sort of agrarian romanticism baked into it. The farmers, they're the true people of the land. They're being usurped by these outsiders. Yeah. And in the 1920s and 1930s, the outsiders were called aliens and cosmopolitans, which is basically code for Jews. Today, they're called immigrants and globalists, which is often also code for Jews, but also for, asylum seekers, everybody else. And in its extreme forms, like with the Dutch farmer revolts, you get this conspiracy theory that it's all part of the Great Replacement, that they're trying to throw the true people off the land and replace them with these immigrants who are coming in and diluting our blood and soil. And now, rural revivalism and green social nostalgia, they're not necessarily connected with fascism, of course. There's lots of different ways in which they can be expressed, though they lend themselves quite easily to it.
It's quite paternalistic, I find. I get the impression that Charles's sort of social nostalgia, it links the environment with the notion of him and his big house and the serfs tilling the soil by hand rather than using these dirty old machines.
Very much so. That's definitely how I see it. And you can trace this back, well, on one level, you can trace it back a very long way to the pastoral poetry of Theocritus and the sort of vision of the Old Testament. But more recently, you can trace it back to the agricultural depression in the 1870s, where thanks to much cheaper grain imports from North America, agriculture more or less collapsed in Britain. And what that meant was that the rental value of the land collapsed, which was a big problem for the aristocrats, because that was their unearned income just going overboard, and they weren't at all happy about this. And so they created this vision of this localized land-based economy and demanded protectionism in order to allow that to flourish. And then when there was a further agricultural depression after the First World War, that idea got more legs, and it was then picked up by the British Union of Fascists, the English Mystery, the English Array, the other fascist organizations in this country. And it's remarkable how how faithful to their ideas rural revivalism today is. So, for instance, they were obsessed with the idea that food is too cheap. They hated processed food and they fetishized unpasteurized milk. And all of these things are still there, and they're still the ideas of King Charles in particular. You know, he's really big on unpasteurized milk and all of these things.
That's interesting, because I was going to say
Mm.
to Graham's vision, you were making me think of tradwives on social media.
Yeah.
And of course, I can never remember his first name, but there's the Kennedy who's now the
Robert Kennedy,
Robert Kennedy.
Robert F. Kennedy
I always,
Jr., yes.
always feel like I shouldn't be calling him Robert Kennedy, because that's
I know.
a great person.
I know.
But and that's his kind of view in terms of health, isn't it?
Mm.
So
it's actually, what you say, it is very closely aligned to the tradwife movement, this whole rural revivalist thing, particularly in the Back to the Land movement in the US. That's absolutely hand in glove with
It
the
is a deeply
tradwife thing.
conservative notion of going back to where we were perceived to be, where the peasant man is tilling the soil and the dutiful wife is
The rich
home.
man at in his castle, the poor man at his gate, and the wife slaving away in the kitchen underneath.
There's kind of another element, because when I was writing my book, I was reading this thing, a very brief interview, the rare interview that Charles did, sort of fairly unscripted as far as I could see, with a BBC person. It was during whichever COP it was in Glasgow, COP 26 or 7 or whatever it was. And his answer was like, oh, you know, I try not to eat meat 2 days a week, and, you know, I try to recycle, and if we all did a little bit, it would help. And it was this kind of a piecemeal notion that rather than the richest 1% who churn out most of the carbon pollution, having huge structural changes to their lifestyles, it's on all of us to sort of recycle our milk bottles and all the rest of it, which seems to completely tilt the argument in entirely the wrong direction.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm happy that there is a strand of environmentalism at all, and I think there is a tendency in the Green movement and on the left to attack people who go some of the way towards where we want them to be, but don't go the whole way, while ignoring those who aren't involved at all. So, the fact that there are members of the royal family who are enthusiastic about environmental ideas does, in this very deferential hierarchical society, give a kind of stamp of approval to the idea of environmentalism, which might otherwise be even more intolerable to the ruling class than it is already. And let's face it, you know, the way environmental protesters are being treated, the prison sentences are getting, all this. I mean, they are trying to demonize us and trying to cast us as the other at all times. So, you know, I have to say that having members of the royal family expressing enthusiasm for the protection of the living world in whatever form it takes is broadly a good thing. However, my environmental vision is quite radically different from theirs, because, you know, while I think a lot of environmentalists have a mixture of the three philosophies, it's not that they sort of cut cleanly where sort of this person is purely a green liberationist and this person is purely a green pragmatist or a green social nostalgic. I think, you know, I definitely tend more towards the green liberationism than the two other strands. So I also have quite a bit of green pragmatism because I see the need for technological change as well.
And what do you think is the impact of Charles favouring that social nostalgia version of environmentalism?
Well, yeah, it does mean that it sort of gives credence to a version of environmentalism which is highly antagonistic to liberationism and indeed to pragmatism also. So, for instance, the people he absolutely worships and supposedly has got a bronze bust of each of these people, Patrick Holden and Vandana Shiva in Highgrove. He apparently has them in bronze. These are people I see as deeply nostalgic Greens who really want to stop a lot of benign technological change. For instance, they've both been highly critical of the calls that I've made and others have made for dietary change towards, for instance, new alternative protein sources, which could have a much lower environmental impact than animal products do. Animal farming is one of the two most devastating influences on the planet, along with fossil fuels. It's transformed more of the planet's surface than anything else that humans do. Has massive greenhouse gas footprint, huge impacts on habitats, on wildlife, on everything really. Pollution, it's a massive polluter. If we got out of animal agriculture, that'd be a really wonderful thing. And to help do that, alternative proteins are to animal farming what solar and wind are to fossil fuels. But the influences that King Charles is very keen on are deeply antagonistic to that kind
also,
of approach.
he runs an agricultural business, and the two duchies are businesses. And when he was Prince Charles, the Duchy of Cornwall wouldn't allow wind farms and presumably solar farms on their land. So he's very, and again, I think it's a nostalgia of, wind farms aren't natural, they spoil the skyline. So that is quite contrary to, the technological solutions to dealing with fossil fuels.
Yeah, and it's very interesting, the way in which the royal family has changed our view of the living world, and not always for the better. So there's this phenomenon which Simon Sharma has described as Balmorality, where what Victoria and Albert did at Balmoral became a model for what all the other Highland estates did. So basically this was a devastated land where the people had been thrown off through the Highland clearances and of course also the lowland clearances, and vast numbers of people had been forcibly removed from the land, and many of them had fled to the cities. Some of them had been literally shipped off to Canada and the US and elsewhere, the Caribbean, and there was a vast rural depopulation. And then Victoria and Albert turn up and say, "Oh, we like all this Highland culture stuff," and invented basically this whole tradition of Scottish dancing and Scottish clothes, and it was all this sort of ersatz tradition which they created. But part of what they embraced as this supposed culture, this completely imaginary, invented culture, was driven grouse shooting and deer stalking. Now, driven grouse shooting is an absolute ecological disaster, because in order to sustain large numbers of grouse so that your very posh people can sit in a hole and shoot them as they come over, you have to burn the land sequentially in order to create new growth, little heather shoots, which the grouse like to eat. And so all the other plants get destroyed, the trees get destroyed. It looks like Mordor in many places, particularly around Balmoral on Deeside. It's horrendous, because there it's probably more intense than anywhere else in Scotland. So you burn the land, and then you legally or illegally kill anything which might eat or compete with the grouse. And so these places become complete wildlife black holes, and all the raptors, the predatory birds, but also all the mammal predators, the stoats, the weasels, the polecats, the pine martens, the wildcats, they're all killed as well en masse by their gamekeepers. And that tradition has very much got its roots in the royal practice of, we're going to get the biggest grouse bags of all. And in fact, the invention of the breech loading shotgun, which coincided with the development of far more efficient military weaponry, led to these huge massacres of game just at the same time as the British were able to carry out huge massacres of people in their colonies. And there was a very similar ethos, we bagged 2,000 Zulus today, or we bagged X number of pheasants or grouse.
And that's another colonialist royal impact on the environment, isn't it? Taking away the original people who looked after the land and managed it. It's going to change the land substantially.
They do still hunt, as far as I know, in terms of where it's legal to do so. And a few years ago, I think William took his son George to Spain to hunt wild boar. And I think it's the hypocrisy which gets a lot of people. And you wrote about this quite a long time ago when You mentioned that Charles had 2 large houses. He's now got 6 large houses. So, and these places have to be lit and heated all year round, whether they are there or not, and they fly everywhere by helicopter, famously flying to Cambridge from Gloucestershire to lecture environmentalists on the need to reduce air pollution from aircraft. Isn't that quite a significant problem that he's also, the audience there is the other rich people who are, again, celebrities do this as well, Hollywood actors, they go off on their huge yachts and then lecture people on the environment.
Yeah,
this is a big problem, isn't it?
It's a constant problem, and particularly becomes a problem when you have very rich people, generally post-reproductive white men, lecturing people about population.
Yes.
This is a big issue. Population is the big issue, and this is certainly something which Prince Philip was very big on. Because it's basically the only issue for which post-reproductive white men aren't responsible in environmental terms, and it's a great way of transferring responsibility away from the high consumers of the West to much, much poorer people in other countries whose fertility rates tend still to be slightly higher, it's. So quite aside from all the sexism, the racism, and everything else which is encapsulated in it, is also completely and utterly futile because, if you wanted to intervene in population growth today, the time to act was 100 years ago. Yeah. What we got is what's called demographic momentum. Fertility rates are falling at tremendous speed, not through any efforts of these population obsessives, but simply because primarily because as women have more choices, they choose not to have so many children or to massively delay having children.
I think I'd like to jump in there and say on behalf of my generation that I feel like economic issues are a much greater barriers to having children than choice these days. I have lots of personal friends who would love to have had lots of children, but you can't even live in a flat. You're living in a 4-bed share house. Exactly. And that's, kind of brings me to a different question because you launched the British Land Rights Campaign, This Land Is Ours, in 1995, along with a manifesto on land reform. And I wondered, what at that time made you think, okay, it's important to address this? And also, where is that movement going now? And how's it doing?
So I think land is a crucial and massively overlooked issue. And it's not overlooked by accident, it's overlooked by design. And I discovered this the hard way when I edited a report for Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. It was published in 2019, shortly before the election, called Land for the Many, and brought together some really brilliant people to write this report. And we very carefully laid out how we could have a much fairer society if we used land in a more equitable way, and through taxation, through sort of more popular control of the planning process, through the money from land going back into the community effectively, a whole load of very sensible and careful measures that we suggested, which would have a really big and important material impact on people in this country, while disadvantaging very few people. The Mail on Sunday, I don't think they even looked at the report. There's no evidence that they did. They wrote this massive piece, it's a headline story about how Labour was going to steal your garden. And it was complete. It was total fiction, and everyone then went berserk and all piled in on us, and we were going to hang them from the lampposts and all of this, and you think, hang on a moment, so, did we write any? They were so that the themes became so repeated and so strong that you began to question yourself. Did we say that? And then
flipping back through the paper to see if you mentioned an execution.
I was literally flipping through, saying, "No, we didn't. We didn't say anything like that." And we realised, what a nerve we had touched there. And so, it's an issue which people avoid because you find out what happens if you don't avoid it. And newspapers, the media in general, just seeks to shut down. But it's absolutely fundamental to our well-being, because how the land is used, how decisions over that use are made, this determines whether we have the houses we need to live in. It determines whether we have the facilities, the schools, the hospitals, the community centres, all the other things, the shops, the pubs that we need to lead a decent life. But also whether you have access to nature and green places to kick a football around in and walk the dog, and all these really fundamental things.
There's been a lot of talk around the housing crisis of the need to start to reduce regulations around green belts. And I just think, well, knowing that so much of the urban land is owned by so few people, I mean, there must be landowners that sit on empty property because it's better to sit on it than get rid of it, and they want to sell it or rent it or whatever. So that land ownership could avoid us, if we reformed the land ownership, I guess that might avoid us then building on the green side.
Well, there's all sorts of things we could do, and one of them is to break the stranglehold of the big house builders, because the big house builders don't actually want to build houses. Their value comes from the speculative value of the land. Right. And so they'll sit on these land banks and they'll trade these land banks and they'll release land for housing as slowly as possible, because if you release too much, the price comes down. And it really comes down now to 6 volume house builders. And they've got us all in a stranglehold. And so, we need to have a much more interventionist policy to say, right, let us decide collectively where the houses should be and who they're going to serve and how they're going to be built. And then government and local authority with popular backing, because, again, this is something where we need to be engaging people as widely as possible. We then say, right, these are the houses we're going to build, rather than leaving it to this thing called a market, which doesn't really function as a market at all. No. I mean, it's completely dysfunctional. It's just a massive, great rentier system, leaving it to them to decide whether and where houses will be built. And so, A, the houses we need don't get built, and B, when they are built, or the houses we don't need are built, because it's all about effective demand. In other words, supplying people who can actually pay for houses, who aren't necessarily the people who need them most, where they are built is often in places which is just completely inappropriate in terms of being supplied with services, in terms of environmental impact, and a whole load of issues like that.
Even access to work for people, not having to drive long distances or educate their children far away.
Exactly. I mean, every community should be a 15-minute community. This is what Anne Hidalgo did in Paris was genius, absolute genius. She's transformed that city. She's made it so much more livable by making sure that the services are where people are, and people are where the services are, and it's just, it works. It's so much more functional. The 15-minute city thing
has become a conspiracy as well, which is a strange idea that we're trying to box people in, which is actually trying to help people live,
convenient lives and environmentally friendly lives.
Sorry, go on.
I just wanted to ask you, because obviously you have a huge amount of work, so I've been doing some deep Googling, and I read an article from 2009 when you talked about this, but I think it's relevant to the conversation today. Charles being able to access information that Parliament is kind of working on, legislation that they're working on, and being able to comment on things and writing letters to MPs and sort of lobbying for himself. Now, he's one of the largest landowners in the UK, as is William, with the duchies. How do you feel about that now? Has your kind of opinion changed?
I mean, I think it's fair to say that we have the minimal possible democracy that we could have been allowed. I mean, it's remarkable how many of the old structures and old systems remain intact despite the supposed democratic transformation of this country. I mean, just look at the symbol of Parliament. What is the symbol of Parliament? You start with the crown on top, which tells you quite a lot straight away, and then below the crown, there's a portcullis. What does a portcullis mean? It means, keep out, you bastard trolls. We don't want you here. And then either side of it, are chains. So is this a welcoming symbol?
It's quite hardcore when you think about it
exactly.
like that.
I know.
More dungeon.
I know. Yeah, when a system tells you what it is, believe it.
Yeah.
And when you look at all the arcane parliamentary procedures, when you look at the way this whole supposedly representative system works, where basically we're allowed to participate once for 30 seconds, once every 5 years, and then the whole of the rest of the time it's presumed consent.
Yeah.
We got a majority, so we presume everyone's consent
Under
for
first
everything
past the
we
post,
want to
so
do. Exactly.
Not exactly a majority.
No, exactly. We got a majority of the
This
seats on a minority of the votes.
This is put to Blair. I remember this is such a great comment that it's after 2005 where they dropped quite a lot, but I think they got in on 35% and they got like an 80-seat majority. And he's asked whether we needed reform, electoral reform, and he said, "Oh well, I think it's broadly what the people wanted." So, well, I mean, it's quite obviously exactly not what they wanted.
Yeah.
That's one of those
wanted
things
it.
where you're talking about anecdotal evidence rather than looking around. It's what he wanted, and he felt good about it.
Yeah.
I think, Graham, you were telling me earlier about that Republic's aim is not just to get rid of the monarchy, but to replace it with a constitution. And you wanted to talk to George about some of his thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. I think a lot of the time people think that being a Republican is just about not liking the royals and getting rid of them. But there is this issue of the big, this, as you said, it's a constitution which has barely shifted in the last 300 years. We've had little bits. I mean, obviously the most significant change is the universal suffrage. But it's just more people have been added to this, very, very inadequate system. And you were writing in, I think, November about a sense of urgency for constitutional reform because we've got this rising populism, the rising far right, the threat of a reform government. And there really are no checks and balances in this country.
No, you can do almost anything you want. It's quite extraordinary. I mean, look what this government is doing with Palestine Action. First of all, it says, right, we're going to ban them. And, really the evidence is not there which could justify that ban. And, the fact that the Court of Appeal has decided it is there with the most, I don't know if you've read it, it is the weirdest judgment I've ever read, where they say, why can't you be like the suffragettes who organise openly and peacefully? Sorry, what? The suffragettes? Arson, bombings, attempted assassinations?
I think they'd be insulted with that description. The court's description.
I mean, it's just, it's this whole fairy tale, of how things work. It's the state is basically benign and the right protest is invisible and, governments, they'll look after us, just leave it to them. And democracy evolves under its own steam. It doesn't need your involvement at all.
It's like Brittany under Bush, isn't it?
Yeah.
I just trust my president.
No, it's quite amazing. It is quite amazing. So anyway, where were we? I can't
remember.
Of course,
the
constitutional reform,
along with republicanism.
They are trying to take away the right to jury by trial, which is a pretty fundamental right.
Yeah, totally.
I was debating in a very conservative group in London a couple of weeks ago. And the Conservatives on the other side were saying, well, we have all these rights, why do we want to get rid of the monarchy? And then they started criticising politicians for getting rid of the right to trial by jury. And it's like, well, you're literally answering your own question. This is being done under the monarchy because it doesn't protect us. No,
exactly. And we are unprotected. That is the problem that it's a good chap's theory of government, which... they wouldn't do something like that. Well, they would do, and they do all sorts of things. A lot of it covert, a lot of things which, we only learn about much later, and they lie to us spectacularly. As the Iraq War being just one of many, many examples. Boris Johnson, almost everything that came out of his mouth, and we've got almost no recourse. When people get into power on the basis of lies, when they take money from impermissible donors, when they give lobbyists favours which no one else would receive. In fact, when they almost effectively cut the population out of decision-making and just listen to the lobbyists, and when they take away our civil liberties, and that's happening at tremendous speed. And there's nothing solid to stop them from doing so within the boundaries of this country. We apply to the ECHR, but the European Court of Human Rights, but they want to stop us doing that as well. If reform get in, they will stop us doing that. And so there's really no protections. We don't have constitutional protection. Now, a constitution is not a guarantee, as they're finding out the hard way in the United States, but it's something to hang on to, and there can be some much better...
Yeah, I mean, I've argued myself that the only thing that can stop the Prime Minister is the backbench. But if the backbench is acquiescent, then, no, we're screwed. And this is what they're finding out in America, that when that division of power suddenly becomes sort of fused together through this MAGA movement, it becomes a lot more dangerous. Although Trump is hitting against a lot of obstacles, such as the Constitution, such as the states and all the rest of it. But we don't have any of that.
No.
But we are, the US and us, the two least democratic countries in the OECD. And so perhaps, some of that is that people aren't being held to account. Or if they are, they're thinking, this is happening over here. Trump's going to support this guy. How many votes am I going to get from this district because it's weighted more heavily in their favor? And so they're not just thinking, what's going to be popular and what can I do that my constituency actually want me to do?
In the UK, they tend, electoral reformers will say this. There's a very narrow group of people who swing an election, and that's who they will target.
And in the US?
Enough, yeah. They'll target them enough to give them the majority. But once they're in, it doesn't matter because, people worry about Viktor Orban and what he did in Hungary. We could go down that route within 2 weeks if we had the right government in place with the right
There's nothing to stop it. Nothing to stop it. And, with all the anti-protest laws and things, they've already got half the armoury they need.
Yeah.
Right-wing authoritarianism is here. And they just have to realise its potential.
Yeah, and we had a protest at Trooping the Colour weekend just gone, and we were sort of given a spot we had to be in using conditions where they just lied on a piece of paper, said, reasonable concern about serious disruption, serious property damage. It was an outright lie, but there's not a lot you can do about it. And a couple of years ago, they tried to use the Human Rights Act to stop us, saying that we would be breaching the rights of the spectators, which is hilarious. We won that argument, but it was absurd. But there's, unless you've got the resources, thousands of pounds to go to court with a 2 days notice.
They tie you up in all this. This is the thing, that it's processed as punishment now. And it's just they make your life impossible if you want to dissent in any meaningful way.
The argument I keep hearing, and bring it back to the monarchy, is that the king will somehow protect us from the excesses of government.
He wouldn't let it happen.
Yeah, but I think that
he's a nice chap.
Yeah, they quote Churchill saying, if Germany had kept the Kaiser, they wouldn't have hit Hitler. But he only conveniently ignores the King of Italy who put Mussolini on the throne.
Well, that's true, and of course the previous Kaiser wasn't that great either. So
no, indeed.
So you'd like a written constitution, George, and would you? And where do you see the role of the monarchy in that, if at all?
I have to say that it hasn't been the biggest issue for me. It's a terrible thing to say on this podcast, but
all are welcome.
Okay. Simply because I've been more obsessed with the issue of corporate power, of billionaire power, of this sort of multinational power block, which is taking everything from us. The billionaires who are funding political movements all around the world, all of which are heading in the same direction, which is towards the far right, because that's what suits their interests, and ripping down just about everything which makes for a good life for the majority of people. And so by comparison to that, while I absolutely see the link, the monarchy looks less scary. So I haven't been focusing on it. However, what I recognise very strongly is that we suffer massively in this country from a culture of deference, and that culture of deference is absolutely rooted in the monarchy.
I was going to say, I think we at Republic see monarchy as the kind of original sin of inequality, and it kind of underwrites, but by placing this hierarchical deference within us, how billionaires can enter in our society and live within us and be seen as celebrities and people be interested in them.
They were way in for billionaires. Charles is a billionaire, first billionaire king, and he has a lot of dodgy friends in dodgy places, receiving bags full of cash from them and all the rest of it. But I think that, for me, I think a lot of it, aside from that, because it is an institution that revels in inequality, it doesn't see it as a problem to be fixed, it sees it as a natural order of things. But it is also that, that the strongest power or strongest defence we have against those corporate powers is constitutional power. And I think that's the key point, is to fix our constitution, which needs to be rooted in popular sovereignty.
Do you think that deference to the super rich that you mentioned, do you think it's really present in kind of what you might label commoners, or do you think it's more in the class of people just below who are hoping to make quite a lot of money off that super billionaire class of people?
Well, so what you're talking about is the concierge class, and so you get a few thousand people with all the power, and then you get a few 100,000 people worldwide who are the primary people serving them, who can become very rich and very powerful in their own right through their concierge role, and they're sort of professionally committed to that deference. But I think there is a wider culture of deference as well, and it comes from generations of terror. I mean, we were terrorized into deference and consent by the terrible, terrible things that successive monarchs and governments in this country did to people who defied them.
You write in such detail about the Enclosure Acts, and I didn't realise that there were decades that saw starvation because of those acts.
Yeah. I mean, it was the terrible things happened in this country, many of which have been swept under the carpet. Not as terrible in terms of their scale as we then went on to do in the colonies, but it became what happened first in Ireland, then in England, then in Scotland, became a model for what we then did to the rest of the world. And the horrors that were visited in Ireland from Cromwell onwards, the siege of Drogheda and many other terrible things that happened there, became a kind of blueprint for. It couldn't go quite as far in England because it was slightly more visible over here, but for the mass expulsion of people from their land with devastating impacts, which then sort of pushed loads of people into the cities who could very conveniently for the new industrialists who could employ them very cheaply. Some of the first factories had cannons pointing inwards.
Wow.
Because people were not that far away from slave labor. I mean, they weren't actual slaves, but they were working 15-hour days in horrendous conditions with no breaks and absolute minimum payments. Horrendous, awful conditions. And of course, then many people were forced to go to the colonies. Then, of course, there were the Scottish clearances as well. And so that became a kind of model
for colonial power of the monarchy.
Exactly, of the monarchy and of companies such as the East India Company, other forms of corporate and private power. And we wreaked horrendous havoc all around the world. We did the most terrible things to people. And of course, the crown, the empire, the glory of it all justified those horrors.
And do you think, the crown is such a symbol? Do you think if we didn't have the monarchy and if the UK had something like an Icelandic-style president, that symbolism would help us address other issues like taxing the super rich?
I do think so. I think that there's so many better ways of running a country and so many better ways of creating a sense of shared purpose and shared identity.
And shared land.
And shared land and shared assets, shared wealth, shared everything, shared power. And, definitely having a monarchy is not the way I would choose. And it's very antithetical to building a fairer society.
And your latest book, which was 18 months ago, I think, The Invisible Doctrine, you talk about the neoliberalism and how it sort of controls a great deal. We're not necessarily aware of the influence it's having. I mean, is there a solution? Is there like a manifesto saying, here's how we address this? Is it constitutional? Is it social? Is it economic?
Behind you if you can see it in the camera, The Invisible Doctrine.
Well, it has to be all of these things. I mean, you can't just fly on one wing. We have to have political democracy, economic democracy, a much more functional community life than we have at the moment. We have been atomized and ruled through this neoliberal doctrine, and so yes, some of the things that me and my co-author Peter Hutchison suggest are on the economic sphere. I propose something which we call private sufficiency, public luxury. That there simply is not enough land, enough ecosystem for everyone to enjoy private luxury. And the only reason we tolerate private luxury is we think that one day it'll be ours. We're all temporarily embarrassed millionaires. But no, that's not how capitalism works. Some people are exceedingly rich because they're exploiting everyone else and extracting their money. And so, capitalism does not lead to a situation where everyone becomes exceedingly rich and lives in private luxury. But if it did, it would cook the planet in about 10 minutes because the ecological impact of the very rich is so much greater than that of other people. However, we do have the resources for everyone to enjoy public luxury, to have magnificent public tennis courts and public swimming pools and public opera and all the things that the rich enjoy, we can enjoy, but in the public domain, where instead of taking away space and resources from everyone else, we're opening the spaces and resources to everyone. And I believe we should have our own private domains where our basic needs are met: a decent home, roof over your head, with the basic things that you need to lead a good life, and those should be ours and ours alone. But if you want to spread your wings and you want to live in luxury, well, the luxury should be in the public sphere. So private sufficiency, public luxury.
So you think there are enough resources for everybody to be in a, warm home with a couple of bedrooms, but just not to have that, more than your share?
Yeah, not to be in your one of 5 super homes with your super yacht in the bay and your super car in the garage, and that as Gandhi said, there's enough for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed.
I always think about taxing wealth as we're not really taxing a billionaire's money, we're taxing our share away from their hands. Because I don't think anyone can become a billionaire from their own work, can they? What work is worth $1 billion?
Yeah.
So, I wanted to ask about the National Trust, and because you've commented on this several times, I really like your quotation that it presents a sanitised tea-towel history of Britain. But obviously these properties are really large. And how do you think something like the National Trust might be changed? What's the alternative to these huge estates being preserved by public money in the way that they are?
So the first thing to say is that it is changing in some respects, and it has been pretty good at acknowledging how these estates were built from slavery and other horrors around the world, and it's come under a huge amount of flack from ultra-conservatives, reactionaries, these restore trust people who are very much into this whole social nostalgia, rural revivalism thing, and they absolutely hate any acknowledgement of how people got so rich. It's just like, well, they're rich because they deserve to be.
I was at a trust property where it said, he built this beautiful park and he moved the village, which was a great idea, probably assaulted by the shock in that.
So this is the stuff they haven't reckoned with at all. And they haven't reckoned with, what did it take for Capability Brown to create this magnificent Elysian landscape? Oh, it took the expulsion of all these villagers and the seizure of their land. And, the king gifted this land to this person because he won a battle. Great, but hang on a moment, who was on that land before? And you have... all of those aspects of history still remain under the limestone. They're not being brought to the fore and discussed.
We've had there's a comedian, Christian Brighty, who does a whole thing about being a lord, and we had him on the podcast, and we were talking about the sanitization of aristocratic life and with costume dramas, and it's always this sort of presented as the noble families, and it's very rare that these costume dramas really get into the darkest parts of their life and why they are in these positions.
Well, again, I mean, it's like, just as like with the symbol of Parliament, showing you who they are. You go to a stately home, and what are the walls covered with? Death. They're all paintings of battles, paintings of hunting, the stuffed heads of various animals they've killed, the weapons of war covering the walls. It's a death cult. You go around these places, and just particularly the royal palaces, I mean, more than any other, and you think it's, death, 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 death. This is what they worship. This is what they love. There is no gang in Tegucigalpa, which is more of a death cult than the British aristocracy.
Yeah, and that we were talking last season about reparations, and we were saying how the inside these houses, gold everywhere and marble, and what these things have been stolen or paid for by money that was taken or earned from slavery, other people's slavery. Why is keeping the physical history important? Why can't these things be taken away and smelted down and sold off and the money given to people who need it?
Yes, I mean, I'd stop short of a cultural revolution, pulling them all down. But let's open them up, as people's palaces.
Yeah.
And it's I would. What I want to see is a full acknowledgement, of how these people got so rich and how we're going to stop them continuing to dominate our societies. And we do so through tax primarily. Now, there's this massive misconception. Wealth taxes are there to raise revenue, but they don't actually raise that much revenue. You say, no, that's not the primary purpose of wealth taxes. I want to shake people about this because it's like, it's just for revenue. It's not. The primary purpose of wealth taxes is to create a more equal society, is to stop the rich dominating us because they translate economic power into political power, and that's how you get oligarchs. That's how you end up with governments completely beholden to a few billionaires rather than listening to the rest of society. Extreme wealth destroys democracy. And the only way of taming that is to tax it and tax it and tax it until it's not extreme wealth anymore. And who cares how much money it raises or doesn't raise? That's not the issue. The issue is protecting our political system.
Some people say, they'll leave the country. But again, I mean...
Good riddance.
Yeah, well, indeed. But I mean, there's someone, a rich person, a business person, saying, well, they wouldn't because... people say, they go and live in Russia, but they don't want to do that because it's insecure for their cash. They want their wealth somewhere secure.
Could we encourage them?
Well, we could encourage them, but the point is they would stay and get taxed.
A lot of them don't pay tax here, do they? Yeah. So it doesn't matter whether they're here or not.
I mean, I started off, I mentioned that, early in your career, you did some extraordinary, and I think you said yourself, possibly reckless trips into places like Amazon and Indonesia. And I guess a lot of what you were seeing was the result of colonialism, is that something which you sort of connect to all of these issues? And do you think that this call for reparations is something which should be answered with reparations?
Very much so. And what I was seeing was ongoing colonialism. Even if countries like Britain no longer have a formal empire, there's a financial empire which still operates and drains huge amounts of wealth from other nations. There's a great sucking sound.
You said something about Suharto's regime. He was in power at the time in Indonesia. And I've lived in Australia for a long time, and I know a lot about what he was doing in East Timor, but you were saying that he was moving people from places like Java into the further out islands at great cost to everybody, but this was somehow sponsored by US and World Bank.
Yeah, the World Bank was pouring money into it. It was massively supported by the US, diplomatically supported by the UK, and it was genocidal in intent.
And what was the purpose of it? I mean, why would we support
ostensibly, that? Ostensibly, it was relieving population pressure in Java and Bali, but the reality is that it was a Cold War gambit. It was like Suharto has to secure his borders against the threat of communism, and so we need these sort of securitized outer islands full of good, loyal citizens from Java and Bali who are going to displace these indigenous people because you never know which way they'll go. But also, of course, that in itself also disguises this colonial resource grab because they weren't just moving people one way, they were shifting all the resources out the other way as well, and with huge destruction, mining and oil palm planting and timber cutting and all the other things which deprive local people of their livelihood, trash the ecosystems, but enrich a few very prosperous multinational corporations.
And you see, I mean, I think that people sometimes are a little bit naive about the UK's role in the world. I mean, you've got the Mau Mau massacre, which is better known, but not well known enough. You've got the treatment of the Chagos Islands, which has become a fresh controversy. We've got this kind of behaviour, which we sponsored. I mean, is this still going on where we are, getting our hands dirty in this kind of thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, we got this sort of myth that, we defeated fascism. And basically fascism is imperialism brought home. And while even, under Attlee, the great peak of social democracy in Britain, we were social democrats at home and fascists abroad. I mean, it was Attlee who launched the horrendous measures in Malaya, which were basically using Nazi tactics against rebels in Malaya. Winston Churchill's government, which oversaw the imprisonment effectively of the entire Kikuyu population in Kenya, with the most horrendous things happening, as Caroline Elkins has documented. These concentration camps in which large numbers of people were tortured to death, just horrendous things happen. One of them, the Ngenya camp, had the words "labor and freedom" above the gates. I mean, it's just like, so this is Auschwitz. In fact, even the Attorney General, Eric Griffiths-Jones, in Kenya at one point said, I say, old chap, isn't this disturbingly reminiscent of what the Nazis did? Yes, I suppose it is. Oh, well, carry on. It's quite extraordinary, quite amazing. We just replicated those things, not because we were copying the Nazis, but it's because it's what we'd always done. In fact, the Nazis were copying us. They were, to a very large extent, inspired by the British imperial model.
It's just that pattern of that dichotomy, isn't it? And wherever you have a hierarchy, you can have atrocities because... that old prison study where they put some university students in a prison and some were guards and some were prisoners, and within a day or two the guards were beating the prisoners. You're always going to get that outcome. And so, I mean, that's just another reason why we'd like to see a republic. I think we're going to have to wrap up there. But so, George, you've got your book, The Invisible Doctrine, that's come out recently. Is there anything else that's up next? Can people get involved with This Land Is Ours?
Well, there's still elements of it going. It's a long time ago, The Land Is Ours.
There's a very active website.
Yes.
Really informative.
Yes. No, there's the good people still involved. It's just not such a big campaign anymore, but there's I'm constantly involved in all sorts of nefarious activities. And I've just working on another book. I'm involved, actually heavily involved with a scientific project because a couple of us stumbled into a scientific breakthrough quite by accident, found a new way of looking into soil. So we've got something called the Earth Rover program, and we've got I think it's now 20 scientists.
This is seismology.
Yes, that's right, exactly, using seismology, ultra-high frequency seismology to look at soil structure and crucial soil properties. And it's got the potential to completely transform soil science and one day perhaps agriculture. It's remarkable. It's one of those amazing things that just happens to you. It was a conversation in a pub and the two of us just went, oh my God. And then it carried on from there.
It feels like you've had such an incredible life from just following your nose. I'm reading Feral at the moment. I'm looking forward to your other books as well. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
Very much. Great.
So thank you so much to our guest, George Monbiot. You can read his work at monbiot.com. He has a regular column in The Guardian, or he is at George Monbiot on Instagram. Remember to like, subscribe, rate, review if you're on the podcast apps. We are on iTunes, Spotify, all your favorite apps. And we are also on YouTube, where you can watch the full videos of our episodes. And of course, we're on Instagram at Republic Campaign. Is that right, Graham? Republic Campaign, or one word, I think, at Instagram. And TikTok. You can buy these t-shirts online to support us or become a member for £4 a month and receive news to your inbox of events and gatherings of Republic members. And remember, you could also send us questions at podcast@republic.org.uk.